Hey guys, I'm Jacob, and today we're going to talk about one of the first women to lead any nation in the modern era, Israel's first female prime minister, and hopefully not its last, Golda Meir. Now, next to Moshe Dayan's eye patch and Ben-Gurion's frizzy hair, Golda is one of Israel's most famous icons. She's revered as Israel's founding grandmother and left behind a legacy as a sharp, fearless leader and passionate fighter for social justice. But is Golda's legacy all that accurate? To some of her critics, she's remembered as a sort of failure, a leader who didn't do enough to address racial tensions in Israel, and whose government's headstrong arrogance was responsible for the devastating losses of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. This seems a bit oversimplistic. She's been called many things: a feminist, a fierce traditionalist, an atheist, and a socialist. But there's one thing she was never called: weak. So, who was Golda Meir, and what made her tick? As a child in Russia at the turn of the century, Golda experienced firsthand the terrifying mob attacks and lynchings of Jews known as the Pogroms. At 8 years old, Golda's family fled Russia and settled in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the land of American cheese. Her parents didn't want her to attend high school, but Golda was one stubborn kid, so she ran away from home and moved in with her older sister Shana, a staunch Zionist. Her sister held parlor meetings at home where Jewish intellectuals would come and discuss ideas of socialism and Zionism, and teenage Golda would drink in every word. At age 17, she joined the Marxist Zionist workers group Poalei Zion, and her lifelong career in Zionism began. Now, if you had to describe Golda's approach to her life and career in 3 words, it would be get stuff done. Whatever the job, she rolled up her sleeves and went at it. She felt that she couldn't accomplish as much as she wanted to for Zionism in the US, so in 1921, at age 23, she and her husband Morris immigrated to pre-Israel Palestine. Or rather, Golda immigrated to pre-Israel Palestine and dragged Morris along with her. They moved to kibbutz, where Golda proved she was not the soft American girl the kibbutzniks assumed her to be, and she was soon chosen as the kibbutz representative to the labor union, rising through the ranks and eventually joining the Jewish Agency, the quasi-government of the Jewish people in pre-state Israel. To really understand Golda, you have to focus on one of the defining moments of her career, the 1938 Evian Conference in a gorgeous commune in southeastern France. It may sound like a relaxing spa retreat, but it was anything but. US President FDR convened a meeting of 32 countries to agree on a plan to accept the thousands of Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi Germany. The agreement they reached was that none of them would accept any additional refugees. That included the US, which was under internal political pressure to put America first, leaving the Jews to fend for themselves. Attending the conference as an observer for the Jewish community of the British Mandate of Palestine, but not allowed to speak, Golda watched in horror and frustration as world leaders tacitly sent the message to Hitler: "We've got enough Jews, and you should figure out what to do with them yourself." This traumatizing experience would influence many of her decisions later on in life. The worldview she developed could be summed up with the Hebrew motto, Ein Breira. Literally, it translates as, "there is no other option," but a better definition would be, you better take care of stuff yourself because no one else is going to do it for you. Meir put this motto to use in 1948 when she insisted Ben-Gurion send her to America to raise funds for the Israeli War of Independence. The Jewish Agency doubted she would raise the $5 million they needed, and in the end, they were right, because she came back with $50 million cash, packed in suitcases in $1 and $5 bills. Imagine getting that past TSA today. Ben-Gurion later said that the money she raised was responsible for the victory and establishment of the State of Israel. In 1949, the year following the establishment of the state, she took on the job of Minister of Labor, overseeing tremendous growth in housing and immigration, creating a revolutionary national healthcare system, and essentially establishing the welfare state. This was a huge deal, considering that Israel started off with virtually no infrastructure in place for its growing population. In 1956, Ben-Gurion appointed her foreign minister. As foreign minister, Golda admired how the newly emerging African states seemingly aligned with her motto of getting things done on their own. She announced, like us, their freedom was won only after years of struggle. Like us, they had to fight for their statehood. And like us, nobody handed them their sovereignty on a silver platter. She also felt a kinship with the Africans who had endured centuries-long suffering, but pushed through it all. So she decided she was done sitting and watching them suffer, and she wanted to do something about it. She started a bold new initiative to send hundreds of Israeli experts to Africa to share their technical, agricultural, and other know-how with these new states. And her plan succeeded at first. Young, tiny Israel helped promote the development of many African countries. But it all fell apart when the Yom Kippur War broke out, which we'll get to in a minute, when the African states cut ties with Israel, labeling it a pariah. Talk about a fall from grace. But Golda's efforts in Africa raise another question. Was she really such a promoter of equality? Well, not always. In the 50s, Israel rushed to absorb Jewish immigrants from North Africa and the Middle East, known as Mizrahim, who soon became more than half of Israel's population. But there was a massive culture clash, and some serious social inequalities came up. Later, as prime minister, Golda made some attempts to bridge the divide, but many people in the Mizrahi community felt like she didn't show the same sense of social justice as she did with the African countries when dealing with the inequity experienced by the Mizrahim. This led to the rise of the civil rights group called the Israel Black Panthers in 1971, named after the American Black Panthers. During one protest of 7,000 people, they hung an effigy of Golda chanting, "A state in which half the population are kings and the other half are treated as slaves, we will burn it down." To some, Golda's culturally elitist attitude towards the Mizrahi plight proved that she and the rest of the Ashkenazi leadership were out of touch and dismissive. Sadly, unlike her efforts in Africa, this was not an example of Golda, the social activist, taking action. But the most traumatizing event of Golda's career, and for the nation as a whole, was the Yom Kippur War. On October 6, 1973, while Jews throughout Israel sat in synagogue and fasted during Yom Kippur services, the armies of Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. Now, there's intense debate around the question of how Golda performed during the Yom Kippur War and who bared the blame for the ensuing fiasco. To some, she totally dropped the ball. She and her advisors had plenty of warning that Syria and Egypt were about to attack from the north and the south. Egyptian troops and tanks gathering on the border? Nah, it's just an exercise. A high-placed Egyptian source, Nasser's own son-in-law, warning Israel that an attack is imminent? Nope, they wouldn't dare. The king of Jordan meeting with the presidents of Egypt and Syria, and then secretly flying to Israel to warn Golda to her face that they were about to attack? No thanks, we're good. Golda's military advisor just could not imagine that the Arab states would attack Israel after their crushing defeat in the Six-Day War of 1967. After all, who would want to embarrass themselves like that again? Israeli intelligence assumed the Egyptians could never cross the Suez Canal and that they wouldn't dream of launching a war they couldn't ultimately win. But it turned out that the Egyptians and Syrians didn't share those assumptions. Who knew? Golda, like the rest of Israeli leadership, bought into this superiority complex. But 6 hours before the attack, when Golda and her team finally woke up and realized that war might be imminent, she ordered a full mobilization of the army. Talk about waiting until the last minute. IDF chief David Elazar wanted to launch a preemptive strike. Golda, whose instinct had always been to strike first, was self-admittedly not all that knowledgeable about military affairs, and Defense Minister Moshe Dayan and Intelligence Chief Aliyah persuaded her that Egypt and Syria were not about to start a war. They were also concerned that by attacking first, they'd look like the aggressor and would lose the support of the US. So instead of following her gut, she listened to her military advisors. Until her dying day, she regretted not having insisted on taking action. The first 2 days of the war shattered Israel's sense of invincibility. Golda, devastated by Israel's major losses, even contemplated suicide. But she forced herself through the despair and got back in the driver's seat, smoking 90 cigarettes a day, fueled by dozens of cups of Turkish black coffee, on no food or sleep, and at 75 years old, she led the war effort with focus, strength, and confidence, earning her nickname the Israeli Iron Lady. Golda and the IDF turned the tables, and by the war's end, Israel had recaptured the territory it had lost, and then some. So you could view this war as an Israeli victory, if not for the impact on Israel's national morale and the tremendous loss of life. After the war, the Israeli people wanted to know who to blame for things going so horribly wrong. So a committee was formed. The Agronaut Commission cleared Golda of direct responsibility and even praised her for acting wisely with common sense and speed. Still, public opinion against Golda was strong. Her approval rating, once as high as 90, was now down to 20. Yikes. Within a month, she resigned. She said, "It doesn't matter what logic dictated, it matters only what I, who was so accustomed to making decisions, who did make them throughout the war, failed to make that one decision." In Golda's mind, her greatest mistake was when she failed to live by her motto of taking action. So, how should Golda Meir be remembered? How could one of Israel's most popular prime ministers also be one of the most scorned? Was she a hero or a failure? And does a leader have to be one or the other? Drop your comments and questions below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.